Hey everyone, welcome back to class. This week we're talking about morality and religion. So we're going to ask whether or not morality and religion have any sort of fundamental connection here. Does morality depend on religion in some way? Because you might think that it does. And in fact, many people do think that it does. Or if it doesn't depend on religion, is it tied to religion in some way? And if so, how is it tied? What is the connection? Many people assume that there's some sort of fundamental connection here. There are several articles, if you just Google, or you can click the links in this slideshow when I send it out. An article, do atheists pose a threat to morality? Can you be moral without God? Atheism and morality? And can atheists be moral? And all of these articles ask whether or not it's possible to be moral without believing in God. So some of these articles argue that you can be moral without belief in God, and some argue that you can't. So some of the articles argue that you can have morality without religion, and some of the articles argue that you can't have morality without religion. But the fact that anyone bothers asking this question at all suggests that there's some sort of assumed connection here, right? No one asks whether eating strawberries requires religion. No one asks whether or not atheists can eat strawberries, because we all sort of can recognize there's obviously no connection there. So no one asks that question because the answer is so obvious. Of course, you can eat strawberries without having any particular religious beliefs. So the fact that people are asking this question, regardless of what answer they end up giving, suggests that there's some sort of assumed connection here. That's if you can be moral without religion, you can have morality without religion, it's not obviously true that you can. And when we talk about this, when these articles are asking whether or not you can be moral without God or without religion, what they're really asking is whether or not you can be a moral realist without believing in some sort of God or gods. They're asking whether you can be a moral realist and an atheist. Does moral realism require religion? Because it seems pretty clear you can be a moral nihilist without religion, or a moral relativist without religion. Moral nihilists think that morality is all an illusion. Moral relativist thinks that morality is just a matter of what a society accepts and what sort of values and rules the society embraces. And those pretty clearly don't require any sort of religion. But moral realism might require religion. That's the real question here. Does moral realism require religion? Does believing in morality as this objective universal thing, does that require religion? So, outside of professional philosophy, like, philosophers who study philosophy and write about philosophy and make philosophical arguments and that sort of thing for a living. Outside of that, morality and religion are often taken to be connected in some way. Even in surveys and things, some atheists refuse to vote for an atheist presidential candidate for morality type reasons. It's assumed that someone who is religious will be more moral in some way, or more likely to follow moral rules or something like that. But inside academic philosophy, inside professional philosophy, they're taken to be pretty much completely disconnected. A large number, maybe not a majority, but definitely a plurality of professional ethicists, people who study ethics for a living, are atheist moral realists. And that's the very view that the articles, can atheists be moral? Can you have morality without God? That's the view the articles are debating the possibility of holding. Whether or not that combination can exist is what those articles are asking. And in fact, pretty significant percentage of professional ethicists and professional philosophers in general are moral realists who don't believe in any sort of God or gods. So, today, we're going to talk about why that is. Why is it that there is some assumed or perceived connection between religion and morality? And why is it that philosophers don't accept this connection? We're going to look at some of the arguments for and against possible connections between morality and religion. So there are three possible connections, or three sorts of connections that one could plausibly think exist between morality and religion. Three ways in which you might think morality requires religion. One is motivation. Just you might think that religion's needed in order to motivate people to be morally good, motivate them to do the right thing. Another is epistemic. Remember, epistemology is the study of knowledge. It comes from the Greek word episteme, meaning knowledge, roughly. So the epistemic connection, if it exists, is a connection where we need religion in order to know what's morally right and wrong. Remember, we talked last week about how moral realists have a problem explaining how we come to know moral truths in the first place. And maybe religion is the answer there. You know, religious texts or God or gods or prophets or whatever tell us what's morally right and morally wrong. And that's how we know. That's one possible connection between religion and morality. And the third connection is metaphysical, where metaphysics is the branch of philosophy dealing with like things that exist and what sorts of objects exist and relations between objects and things like that. The metaphysical connection, if it's there, is that you need religion to explain what the moral truths are, how objective moral truths exist in the first place. Because we also talked last week about how moral realists have a problem explaining what moral truths are, what moral rules are, because there are very weird things in the world. And you may need a god or gods to explain the existence of these objective moral facts, what they are. And so there's a metaphysical dependence in that case. And these are the three sort of ways in which you might think that morality requires or depends on religion. And not any particular religion, just some sort of religious belief in God or gods. So, first is motivation. So as an empirical fact, right, this is not a philosophical claim, this is just empirically what happens in the world. Many people do bad things and never get punished in their lifetime. They live and die and live long, happy lives, never being punished or facing any sort of comeuppance for the horrible things they've done. And many people who do the right thing are not rewarded for doing so. In some cases, historically, people have been punished in various horrifying ways for doing the right thing. And you might worry that knowing that people who do bad things don't get punished in their lifetime, and people who do good things don't get rewarded in their lifetime, you might think, knowing that, people will try to do bad things and get away with them. They won't do the right thing. They'll do the wrong thing whenever it's convenient for them and try to get away with it. Or in cases where they know they can get away with doing the wrong thing, they'll do it because there'll be no punishment. They know they'll get away with it. But many religions state that people who do bad things will be punished after their lives end. Maybe there's karma and it'll impact them in their future reincarnations, or there's a God, or there's gods, there's an omniscient being who knows all the bad things we do and will punish people for the morally wrong things they've done and reward people for the morally good things they've done. If that's true, then there's no such thing as getting away with it. If you'll be punished after death, then you cannot get away with it overall, even if you do seem to get away with it in your lifetime here on Earth. And so one might worry that without this sort of afterlife punishment system in place, there's no motivation to be morally good when you can get away with being morally bad. If you can get away with doing the wrong thing and never face any repercussions, then you might think people will just do the wrong thing whenever it's convenient for them and try to get away with it. And so you need, or the argument goes that you need religion, you need God or karma or heaven and hell or some sort of religious divine reward and punishment system in place in order to motivate people to do the right thing when no one's watching. To do the right thing when they know that they could get away with doing the wrong thing in their lifetime. Because with religion, with a God in place, there is never a time where no one's watching. There's always an omniscient being watching who will punish you for the things you do wrong. And that will motivate you not to do morally wrong things. It'll motivate you to do the right thing, even when you could get away with it in your lifetime. But this has not convinced many philosophers. And the usual response, or the most common response, is something like this. If you're only doing the right thing because you're worried about your rewards and punishments, you're worried about how it'll impact you, then you aren't really morally good. You're not actually behaving morally. And you don't need to be a philosopher to think this. I'll send out some YouTube links to some videos from TV and other things making this point. But here are just two quotes, one from Einstein and one from Penn Jillette, who's like a Vegas magician, I think. So Albert Einstein said, "A man's ethical behavior should be based effectually on sympathy, education, and social ties and needs. No religious basis is necessary. Man would indeed be in a poor way if he had to be restrained by fear of punishment and hopes of reward after death." Right? So Albert Einstein's point here is that if the only thing holding you back from harming people is that you're worried you'll be punished, and the only thing causing you to help people is that you hope you'll be rewarded, then you are behaving selfishly and badly, and that is not good. That's not morally good. Similarly, Penn Jillette has this quote that a question I get asked by religious people is, without God, what's to stop me from murdering all I want? And he says, I do murder all I want, and the amount I want is 0. The fact that these people think that if they didn't have this person, God, watching over them, then they would go on killing rampages is the most self-damning thing I can imagine. I don't want to do that. Right? And Penn Jillette's point is, look, if you are a morally good person, you should not want to murder people. You should not want to harm people. A morally good person doesn't need the threat of punishment or the promise of reward in order to help people and not to murder people. Someone who wants to murder people but is only not doing that because they think it'll go poorly for them, doesn't care about other people, has no interest in other people's well-being, and is solely selfishly motivated, purely selfish motivations. And that's not morally good. That's morally bad. The if you've seen the TV show True Detective, Matthew McConaughey has a line that if the only thing keeping a person decent is the promise of divine reward, then brother, that person is a piece of shit. And that's sort of the idea here, that if the only thing motivating you to be kind and not to murder is the promise that you will be rewarded, then you're not a morally good person. You're a selfish person who doesn't care about other people. And that's not making you morally good. So it looks like religion and the threat or promise of divine punishment reward isn't motivating you to be morally good. It motivates immoral people to pretend to be morally good. It motivates people who don't care about anybody and want to murder everybody to, be cool and not murder anybody for selfish reasons. But that's not the same thing as morality. Pretending to be moral for the selfish reasons is not actually being moral. Motivating immoral people to pretend to be moral is very different than motivating people to be moral. Right? And so the issue of what motivates moral people to be moral is still open. What motivates people to genuinely be moral? Well, religion doesn't seem to help explain that, is sort of the thought here. Religion can help explain why immoral people pretend to be moral. But it doesn't help explain why genuinely morally good people are morally good. What motivates them to genuinely care about the well-being of other people? And that is really the question of how to be a morally good person. And religion can't help explain that motivation. So the motivational work done by religion isn't in being morally good, it's in pretending to be morally good for selfish reasons, which is not the same thing as being morally good, or so the argument goes. If you're a pure consequentialist, you might think intentions don't matter, and not murdering people for selfish reasons is just as good as not murdering people for genuine caring about other people type reasons. But putting that aside, it does look like there is a difference between someone who doesn't want to murder anybody at all and someone who wants to murder other people but is worried that they'll personally be punished for it and so doesn't. It looks like intuitively there is a difference there. And not wanting to murder people at all is morally better than wanting to murder people but restraining yourself for selfish reasons. So the argument goes, it may look like religion can motivate people to be morally good, but in fact, it does not. It cannot motivate people to be genuinely morally good. And so it doesn't do the motivational work that people want it to. So the divine reward and punishment doesn't help explain why moral people are morally good. There are likely many possible motivations for being moral. Some may be religious in nature, but many likely aren't. So the motivational connection is generally taken not to hold. Morality does not depend on religion for motivational reasons. Now, the second possible connection is epistemic, and we will talk about that in the next video.